They said nothing ever came back from Devil's Cut Canyon, not the cattle that slipped, not the hunters that followed, not even the echoes that fell too deep. But one wind-torn afternoon, an aging cowboy named Cole Maddox heard something that froze his blood, a single broken whinny rising from the gorge below. When he climbed down that cliff to save a trapped wild horse, he thought he was just fighting to keep a creature alive. He didn't know he was about to awaken something the West itself had forgotten, a legend carved in bone dust and fire. And it was waiting for him. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe. The desert wind moved like a ghost across Red Mesa, carrying with it the red breath of the land. Everything shimmered in the late heat, the air, the sand, even the shadows that stretched long across the dry valley. The ground was cracked and the sagebrush trembled in the gusts that never seemed to end. Out by the road, a rusted sign creaked on one hinge, Broken Spur Ranch, Est. 1894. Every time the wind caught it, the sign groaned like an old man remembering something too heavy to say aloud. A tin can rolled across the hard earth, clinking until it hit the fence. The iron rails moaned and swayed, dry hinges screaming into the distance. Above it all, the sun began its slow descent, turning the dust to gold. The land looked alive for a moment, burning in the dying light, and then it looked dead again, like a photograph of a world that used to be. Out here, beauty and decay were the same thing, and the line between them was fading with every sunset. Red Mesa wasn't dying fast. It was dying quiet. Cole Maddox stepped out of the barn, his shadow long and thin against the dirt. He was 47 now, though the years had been harder than that number deserved. His hair had gone silver around the edges, his face lined from squinting into wind and time. His left leg carried a hitch from an old rodeo fall, and his clothes, once bright denim and leather, were now faded to the color of the dust itself. He moved slow but sure, like a man who no longer rushed because there was no one waiting. In the mornings, he still drank his black coffee from the same chipped mug, still walked the fence line, still muttered to the old cow that followed him like a tired dog. "Bessie," he'd say, patting her neck, "you're about the only one left who remembers the way things were." Inside the cabin above the mantel hung a tarnished rodeo medal. A framed photo half burned at the corner, him and his horse Whisper, standing proud after a championship ride long ago. The edges were curled and smoke-stained, the colors faded, but the fire in the horse's eyes was still there. Cole would sometimes catch himself staring at that photo for minutes at a time, fingers resting on the frame, remembering the sound of the crowd, the smell of the dirt, the thunder in his chest. Then he'd mutter, "They cheered when I rode, then forgot me when the dust settled." He'd pause, take another sip of coffee, and say the thing that had become his prayer. His curse and his truth that the West don't die all at once. It just gets quieter every year. The silence had come for him 7 years ago, on a night when the sky turned red. He remembered every detail, the way the storm rolled over the ridge without a sound, the way lightning hit like a hammer in the distance, splitting the air and the dark in one blow. Then came the fire. It moved faster than thought, faster than fear. By the time Cole ran from the cabin, the barn was already screaming with it, wood cracking, hay exploding into sparks. Whisper was inside. Cole didn't think, didn't grab water or rope. He just ran. The smoke punched him in the lungs as he kicked the door open. Inside, through the haze, he could see the horse thrashing ropes tangled around its stall. He cut one loose, shouted its name again and again, but the fire was alive, reaching, clawing. Something heavy collapsed. He felt the heat take the hair from his arms. A beam came down and struck his shoulder, sent him sprawling in the dirt outside. When he looked back, The roof caved in, and Whisper's final cry tore through the night. It wasn't a sound of pain, it was the sound of something ancient leaving the world. Even now, sometimes, when the wind blew just right, he swore he could hear it again, faint and far away. Since that night, the old stable had remained a black scar on the land. The wood still held the scent of ash. He passed it every morning, but never stepped inside. Some fires never go out, he once told the empty yard. They just learned to burn quiet. The years after blurred together. People left, cattle thinned. The bank stopped sending letters they'd given up, expecting money that would never come. The fences rusted and the radio broke, and still Cole stayed. He didn't know if it was loyalty or stubbornness, maybe both. There were nights he'd sit on the porch, a guitar on his lap, plucking the same 3 chords until the stars came out. The music wasn't for anyone. It was just to remind himself that he could still make a sound. Sometimes, when the wind was still enough, he'd talk to the land like it was listening. "You've seen worse, haven't you?" he'd say. "Dust bowl, drought, men who thought they could own you." The land never answered, but it never left either. That evening, as the sky bled purple and gold, Cole walked the line one last time. The air was strangely calm. Even the cicadas had gone quiet. He checked the gate, fixed a loose wire, then headed back toward the house. The wind had died completely now. The silence was so deep, it seemed to hum. He poured himself a drink and sat on the porch steps, boots propped on the railing, eyes scanning the endless red horizon. The sign out front swayed once and then stopped. He listened, waiting for something he couldn't name. Memory, maybe. Redemption. Or just a sound other than his own breathing. The light faded until the world turned the color of smoke. A coyote called far off, its cry, long and lonely, carried on the last strand of wind. Cole tilted his head, watching the first star cut through the haze. He thought of Whisper, how that horse used to run like the wind itself, how its hooves barely seemed to touch the ground. The memory came so vivid, he could almost hear it again. The rhythmic thunder of hooves, the wild breath, the soft snort after a long ride. He closed his eyes. "Whisper," he said softly, "if you're still out there. Keep running." 2 days after the sunset silence of that long evening, Red Mesa wore a different face. The desert had been swallowed by a storm that came without warning, an ocean of dust and wind that tore across the valley for hours, stripping the land bare. It rattled the windows of Cole's cabin, peeled the paint from the fence posts, and left the air thick with the smell of static and grit. Now, as the morning light broke through, the storm was gone, but the world felt hollowed out, scraped clean. The sky was too clear, the ground too still, as if the desert itself were holding its breath. By late afternoon, Cole saddled Ranger, his bay gelding, and rode out toward the hills to find a few cattle scattered during the storm. The trail was soft underfoot, still shifting from where the wind had cut new scars into the earth. Dust lingered in the air, glowing in shafts of sun that sliced through the canyon edges. The heat had a metallic taste. Ranger's hooves made no sound on the dry soil, and even the usual cries of hawks were missing. Cole's shirt clung to his back, sweat cutting pale streaks through the red dirt on his skin. He said nothing. He hadn't spoken much since the storm, not even to himself. The silence felt unnatural, too heavy, too complete. Every now and then, he scanned the horizon, not just for cattle, but for something else he couldn't name. Maybe for proof that life still clung to this land. Maybe for forgiveness. The late sun spilled molten light across the desert, turning the sand into a mirror. The air shimmered with gold heat so bright it almost hurt to look at. The whole place felt dreamlike, halfway between ruin and resurrection. And in that strange stillness, Cole's eyes kept drifting toward the distant ridges, as if expecting something to move, a shadow, a figure, a memory that hadn't finished with him yet. Then the wind stopped altogether. It didn't fade or slow, it just stopped, as if the world had paused mid-breath. The reins went slack in his hand. The kind of silence that fell wasn't peaceful. It was thick, expectant, alive. Even Ranger twitched his ears uneasy. That was when Cole heard it, a sound so faint at first, he thought it was a trick of his mind. A single broken whinny carried on the air. It rose, cracked, then fell apart like something drowning. Cole froze. For a long moment, he didn't move his gaze, sweeping the ridges, the dry washes, the distant gulch below. The sound came again, clearer this time, low and ragged, echoing off the rock walls like the voice of a dying thing. Not the sharp cry of a spooked animal, but something deeper, more desperate. It was the kind of sound that crawled inside your chest and stayed there. He pulled Ranger to a stop, listening. Nothing moved but the dust swirling in lazy spirals. He waited, and then there it was again, fainter but unmistakable. Cole slid down from the saddle boots, crunching against the brittle ground. He crouched, head tilted, trying to catch the direction. The cry rose once more, strangled and gasping, coming from somewhere below the cliffs, far down in the gut of the land, where the light never quite reached. He felt it before he understood it, his heart starting to pound, that old ache in his ribs, the one that had never healed since the fire. The sound wasn't just a horse. It was a memory tearing itself free. He whispered, almost afraid of his own voice. "That ain't just a horse," he said. "That's a soul screaming to live." Ranger snorted and stamped, uneasy. Cole rubbed his muzzle, eyes still on the horizon. "Easy, boy. We're just listening." But he wasn't listening anymore. He was remembering. The smoke, the heat. Whisper's final cry echoing through the flames. The sound now wasn't the same, but close enough to twist a knife in him. His stomach tightened. He stood there for a long time, staring into the canyon's dark mouth as if it were whispering his name. The world around him seemed to fade, until there was only that sound, faint and broken, calling from the shadows. When it came again, weaker, more frantic, he didn't hesitate. He swung back into the saddle and turned Ranger toward the south ridge where the land dropped into Devil's Cut Canyon. A scar carved deep into Red Mesa's body, a place most folks in town avoided. They said the wind could vanish down there and never come back out. Even the ranchers called it cursed. But Cole wasn't thinking about stories. He was thinking about the sound, the life that was slipping away somewhere beneath that red earth. As he rode the path, narrowed the ground, slanting toward the canyon's lip. The sun had dipped low, now bleeding orange across the sandstone. Every few steps, the wind picked up again, sharp and biting, lifting tiny whirlwinds of grit that stung his eyes. Ranger's muscles bunched beneath him, the horse uneasy, sensing what lay ahead. When they reached the overlook, Cole pulled the reins and stopped. Below him, the canyon yawned open, a narrow, twisting slit of darkness that swallowed light. Rocks jutted like broken teeth along the slope. If something had fallen down there, it didn't have long. He dismounted again, tying Ranger's reins to a scrub of mesquite near the edge. "Stay put," he said softly. The horse flicked an ear, but didn't move. "God damn," he muttered, voice trembling just enough to betray the fear behind it. He glanced back toward the horizon, sun nearly gone, sky bruising into violet. Any sensible man would have turned back. But Cole wasn't a sensible man, not when it came to mercy. He loosened the coiled rope from his saddle horn and slung it over his shoulder. A flashlight hung from his belt, a hunting knife from his hip. "If I walk away now," he said quietly, almost to the wind, "I'll hear that sound for the rest of my damn life." He squinted against the glare. Down there, caught between two boulders, was a horse. Not just any horse, a wild one, silver gray, from mane to tail, its coat glinting in the last light of the dying sun. It wasn't standing. One front leg was twisted under its body, jammed between the stones. Around its neck hung an old rope, frayed and filthy, biting into the flesh, a remnant of some hunter's snare. The animal was pinned, trembling sides, heaving with every ragged breath. Each time the wind blew, small rocks skittered past its body, tumbling farther down the slope. Another inch, Cole thought, and the whole ledge would give way. Death waited only a breath away. The sunlight broke through the canyon rim for one final moment, and to touch the horse's hide. The pale coat flashed like a mirror, a ghostly shimmer of silver dust. For an instant, it didn't look real at all. Cole swallowed hard, his hand tightening on the rope slung over his shoulder. "God almighty," he murmured, voice hoarse from dust. "What the hell happened to you, boy?" He backed away from the edge, unbuckling Ranger's saddle. The gelding snorted, uneasy ears pinned back against the keening wind. "Easy," Cole muttered, patting his neck. "You done enough today." He looped the saddle rope around the base of a scrub cedar that clung stubbornly to the rock face, testing the knot twice. The ground here sloped hard toward the drop. He judged the distance by eye, about 20 feet down, steep enough that one wrong move could break his neck. From below, the trapped horse kicked again, hooves striking stone. Pebbles clattered upward like bullets. Cole crouched near the rim and called down his voice, calm, but low the way he used to talk to Whisper when the chute gate opened before a ride. "Easy now. Ain't no one gonna hurt you." The horse tossed its head, wild-eyed breath coming out in short, broken snorts. The rope at its neck pulled tight, choking it. Cole watched the panic ripple through its muscles, raw fear and fire, the same kind that used to live inside him before time burned it out. "You ain't the only one been trapped, boy," he whispered. He took a deep breath and pulled the gloves from his back pocket. The air was cooling fast. The sun had dropped behind the ridge, leaving the canyon half in shadow. He ran the rescue line through his hands, tied a loop at his waist, and leaned over the edge. The walls were slick with sand, the stone crumbling under his boots. He tested the first foothold. It held. "Here we go," he said to no one, and stepped down into the wind. The rope creaked as he descended boot to boot, gripping rock with his fingertips. Grit tore at his palms. Each breath came harsh, the dry air cutting through his throat. Halfway down, a gust hit him square in the chest and swung him sideways. He slammed against the cliff pane, flashing through his ribs. The horse below screamed, a raw, shattering sound that echoed up the canyon. Cole steadied himself and kept moving. When his boots hit bottom, the ground shifted beneath him. He landed in a crouch beside the animal. Up close, it was worse. Blood matted its fetlock, and the rope around its neck had rubbed the skin raw. The horse rolled its eyes toward him, nostrils flaring, every muscle taut with fear. Cole stayed still, crouched low, hands out where he could see them. "All right," he whispered. "We're just two fools stuck in the same damn hole. Let's get you out." He eased closer, one step at a time. The horse tensed, trying to kick, but the trapped leg held it fast. The rope at its neck tightened again. It wheezed, sides heaving. Cole felt the sting of helplessness twist through him. "Easy, boy. Ain't nobody gonna break you again." He pulled his knife from his belt and waited. The animal's eyes rolled white. Its breath came in short bursts. He waited until the trembling slowed, until its fight turned into exhaustion. Then, quick as he could, he reached forward and sliced through the frayed rope. The horse jerked its head violently, the sudden release sending a spray of pebbles down the slope. Cole threw himself sideways, boots skidding. His shoulders slammed against the canyon wall. A section of loose rock gave way under him. For an instant, he hung suspended, one hand, gripping the edge, the other flailing in open air. Damn it! The horse kicked, scrambling its body, twisting to free its leg. The ledge cracked louder. Cole saw the rock under them crumble like dry bread. He lunged forward, shoved his knife into a crack, and used it to pull himself up beside the animal. He grabbed the rope still looped at his waist, wrapped it around the horse's chest, and shouted over the wind, "Move, damn you, move." The animal tried, hooves scraping, pushing against the slope. The world exploded in motion, rock, sand, and noise. The ledge gave way. Cole felt the earth drop out beneath them. For a heartbeat, everything was weightless. Then they fell. The impact drove the breath out of him. They slid down the embankment together in a storm of red dust and grit, tumbling until the slope leveled out 20 feet below. When they finally stopped, Cole lay half on top of the horse, half buried in sand. His hat was gone. His mouth tasted like blood and dirt. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Only the sound of their breathing filled the canyon, rough, wet, alive. Cole knelt beside the horse, his breath still ragged from the climb. The animal lay stretched on its side chest, rising and falling in uneven bursts, eyes closed but alive. Cole reached out and pressed a hand to its neck. The hide was warm beneath the dirt, alive, trembling, real. "Easy," he murmured, voice hoarse. "You're all right, boy? You're all right now." His fingers brushed through the tangled mane, clearing away bits of grit. That was when he felt it, a patch of rough skin just below the rope mark. He pushed aside the dust, squinting in the fading light. There, under his palm, ran a small circular scar, smooth and pale against the gray hide. Cole froze. His stomach turned cold. It was the same mark. Not similar, not close the same. A burn shaped like the loop of a lasso, exactly where Whisper's rope had caught fire the night the barn went up in flames. He remembered pulling on that line until his hands bled, screaming through the smoke, the horse crying in pain as the rope seared its neck. The scar had haunted him for 7 years. Every night when he closed his eyes, he saw the red glow, the collapsing timbers, the last cry that tore his heart out of his chest. Now here it was again, alive on the body of a horse that shouldn't exist. He blinked hard, his throat tightening. The dust stung his eyes, or maybe it wasn't the dust. His vision blurred, his pulse pounding in his ears. "You even got his eyes," he whispered. "Lord, what are you?" The horse stirred. Its eyelids fluttered open, revealing a pair of deep brown eyes, soft, dark, filled with a sadness that reached straight through the years. Whisper had eyes like that. Eyes that saw more than fear, more than command. They saw him. Cole felt something collapse inside him, a wall he hadn't known he'd built. The wind picked up again, brushing through the canyon like a memory come home. Somewhere far off, the faintest echo of a whinny rose and fell, a sound so distant it might have come from another lifetime. Cole closed his eyes and listened. It sounded like forgiveness. He stayed there beside the horse until the trembling slowed, until its breath evened out. The light was slipping fast. The world around them was turning purple and gold. He should have gone for help, should have thought about shelter or food. But his mind was caught between then and now, between the fire and this strange, quiet miracle. The horse shifted again, trying to lift its head. Cole slipped an arm under its neck, steadying it. The animal grunted, muscles quivering, then tried to stand. Its injured leg folded, sending it back to the ground with a low groan. Cole crouched beside it, voice gentle but firm. "Easy, boy. No one's hurting you no more." The words left his mouth before he could stop them, and the same words he'd shouted into the flames years ago, too late for Whisper to hear. This time the horse stilled at the sound, breathing hard, but listening. Cole waited, feeling the pulse under its skin, steady but weak. It tried again, hooves scraping the dirt, pushing against the slope. Cole moved with it, guiding, not forcing. Dust swirled around them as the animal heaved its weight upright. For a long second, it wobbled sides, heaving nostrils wide. Then, trembling, it found balance on 3 legs. Cole stepped back, watching. The setting sun caught the horse's hide and flared, turning gray to silver to light. The air itself seemed to shimmer around it. For the first time in years, Cole felt something he'd thought he'd lost forever. "Wonder?" "Yeah," he said softly, almost smiling. "That's it. Stand tall." The horse's ears flicked toward him. The rope that had once bound its neck now lay limp in his hands, shredded, useless. He turned it over, staring at the frayed end, and tightened his grip until the cords dug into his palm. This piece of rope had trapped the horse. Now it was just a reminder of the chains both of them had carried too long. He tossed it aside. The wind shifted, sweeping through the canyon and carrying the last warmth of the day with it. Shadows stretched long across the ridge, crawling towards them like old ghosts coming home. Cole stood there, one hand still on the horse's shoulder, feeling the tremor of its muscles calm beneath his fingers. "You did good, boy," he said. "Real good." The horse flicked its tail once, as if to answer. He looked at the creature, really looked. The shape of its muzzle, the faint dapples under the coat, and the way the light clung to it. It wasn't Whisper, not exactly, but there was something in it that was more than resemblance. Something carried over, not flesh, not blood, but spirit. It blinked slowly, then lowered its head. For a heartbeat, Cole thought it might collapse again, but instead, it stepped forward, nose brushing his arm. The touch was soft, hesitant testing. He held still. "Well," he said after a long silence, voice catching in his throat, "guess we're both still breathing. That's something." The horse snorted a low rumble that could have been irritation or understanding. Cole chuckled, a sound rough from disuse. "Don't laugh at me now. Ain't every day an old cowboy gets dragged back from hell by a ghost." The name came to him without thought. It just fit. The color, the shimmer, the impossible way the horse stood there against the dying light. "Silver dust," he said quietly. "Suits ya." The horse turned its head, the fading sunlight scattering across its coat in tiny, shifting sparkles. The name hung in the air like a promise. Silver dust. Cole reached out again. The horse didn't pull away this time. It leaned forward, breath warm against his hand, and pressed its muzzle into his palm. It was the first gesture of trust, fragile, fleeting, but real. Cole's throat tightened. He hadn't realized how long it had been since something had trusted him. He smiled then. Not the forced kind he gave the townsfolk when they asked how he was holding up, but the kind that came from somewhere deep, an old place he thought had burned away with Whisper. The canyon around them glowed with the last breath of sunlight. Red Mesa stretched out silent and endless, every rock and ridge bathed in gold. He let the moment fill him, the smell of dust, steady breathing beside him, the warmth of life that shouldn't have survived, but did. "Silver dust," he repeated softer this time. "You and me will figure it out." The wind rose once more, carrying the faint scent of rain from far off, though none would come tonight. The horse lifted its head, looking toward the horizon where the sun had disappeared. Cole followed its gaze. For the first time in 7 years, the world didn't feel empty. It felt waiting. Cole rubbed a hand across his face and sighed. "Well, partner," he murmured, "looks like we both got a second chance." The horse blinked once, slow and sure, then exhaled through its nostrils, stirring the dust at Cole's boots. He chuckled. "Yeah," he said, "I'll take that as a yes." Night was crawling over Red Mesa by the time Cole and Silverdust reached the ranch. The horizon bled out its last streaks of gold, leaving the desert in shades of blue and rust. The air smelled of sand smoke and something faintly metallic like old blood that refused to dry. They walked in silence, both limping in their own ways. Cole from the ache in his leg, and the horse from the wound that still made him stumble. Each step homeward felt like walking back through years he'd tried to bury. When they reached Broken Spur Ranch, the house looked smaller than he remembered. The fences were leaning, the well half collapsed, and the once white barn stood like a skeleton under the stars, its frame blackened, its boards warped and split from the fire that had ended everything. The smell of char still lived there, faint but stubborn like a memory refusing to die. Cole stopped a few yards away, reins in hand. The horse snorted and pulled back slightly, nostrils flaring. "Yeah," Cole said quietly, "I know." For a moment, neither of them moved. The wind rattled the loose boards, whispering through the cracks, like ghosts gossiping. Then Cole stepped forward and pushed open the barn door. The hinges groaned in protest, a sound he hadn't heard in 7 years. He stared at the emptiness inside, the dirt floor, the burned beams, the roof that showed too much sky. "Ain't much left," he murmured, voice low and tired. "But it's home." He uncoiled the rope from around Silverdust's neck and guided him in. The horse hesitated, every muscle tense, eyes wide at the shadows. Cole moved slow, keeping his tone steady, quiet. He cleared out what debris remained, then brought in what little hay he still had stored. He found the old lantern on a hook, filled it halfway with oil, and struck a match. The flame flickered to life, soft and gold, throwing light across the scarred wood. In that glow, the place didn't look haunted anymore. It looked waiting. He spread an old blanket on the ground, one that had survived the fire, in a trunk near the porch. He didn't know why he'd kept it. Maybe because it was the last thing that still smelled faintly of whisper. When he laid it down beside Silverdust, the horse shied back, ears flat. "Easy," Cole said again, letting the reins hang loose. "Ain't no fire here no more." The horse didn't come closer, but it didn't bolt either. That was enough. Cole stepped back, gave him the space. The night wind pushed through the cracks, and the lantern flame leaned sideways, painting both their faces in uneven light, man and horse, two shapes cast from the same stubborn dust. Silverdust didn't sleep that first night. Every sound, the creak of a board, the rustle of wind through the grass, made him flinch. When the lantern sputtered, he reared, striking the air with his front hoof. Cole didn't move. He just sat against the support beam with his old guitar in his lap, fingers idly tracing the strings. The wood was dry and warped the sound, thin and broken. But it filled the barn with a kind of warmth no fire could make. He didn't sing, not yet. He just played slow, quiet, patient. Silverdust stood pressed to the wall, eyes wide, body shaking. Cole didn't look at him. He just kept strumming the same old tune, the one Whisper used to calm to when storms rolled through. Every now and then he'd sip from his tin cup of coffee, its smell mingling with the faint sweetness of hay. "Take your time, boy," he said once, not raising his voice. "Ain't in no rush." The horse exhaled sharply, still tense but listening. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing against the barn with long, low sighs. Inside, the flame flickered, throwing shifting gold across the rough boards. For the first time since the fire, Cole didn't feel the weight of silence pressing down. It wasn't loneliness now, it was waiting. The first night, Silverdust didn't eat. He turned away from the hay muscles, quivering eyes, never leaving the exit. Cole stayed put until the lantern burned out. The second night, the horse still kept his distance, but his breathing came slower, more even. Cole brewed coffee on the small iron stove in the corner, the smell filling the cold air. He tuned his guitar by ear and sang quietly, voice rough but steady. The songs weren't for comfort. They were for company old cowboy ballads about long roads, lost horses, and men who stayed too long where they weren't wanted. Silverdust flicked his ears toward the sound. Cole caught the movement but said nothing. He kept playing until the stars faded behind thin clouds and the desert's chill crept into his bones. By the third night, the wind outside had turned wild again. Dust scraped against the walls, the doors rattled in their frames, and thunder muttered far off. Silverdust started pacing, hooves thudding against the floor. When lightning flashed through the slats, he reared, striking the air, eyes rolling white. Cole rose, setting the guitar aside. "Easy, boy," he said, stepping forward slowly. Silverdust tossed his head, nostrils flaring. The storm outside grew louder, the smell of rain mixing with smoke from the lamp. Cole took another step. His hands were open, calm. "You're all right," he said softly. "Ain't no fire here no more." The horse froze, sides heaving. The words seemed to reach somewhere inside him. For a long heartbeat, they just looked at each other. The man who had lost everything, and the creature that had been hunted, burned, nearly broken. Then slowly, Silverdust lowered his head. Cole reached out and placed a hand against his neck. The muscle jumped under his palm, but the horse didn't pull away. The thunder rolled again, softer this time, like it was moving farther off. The wind eased. Cole stayed there, hand resting on that warm, trembling neck, until both their breathing matched. The storm passed, and the barn was still. By the fourth night, something had changed. Cole could feel it before he even stepped inside. The air wasn't heavy anymore. It was quiet in a different way, peaceful, expectant. He filled a small bowl with salt and set it down near the horse's stall. He didn't look directly at him, just placed it there, then backed away to his usual spot against the post. The lantern light glowed steady, soft. Cole sat with his guitar across his lap, but didn't play this time. He just listened. For a long while, there was nothing. Only the slow, steady sound of Silverdust's breathing. The horse stood still, watching the man in the corner with eyes that reflected the lamplight like amber glass. Minutes stretched. Then cautiously, he stepped forward. One hoof, then another, the injured leg trembling slightly. He lowered his head, sniffed the bowl, and after a moment's pause began to lick. The faint sound of salt on tongue was almost sacred in that silence. Cole didn't move. He just smiled, a quiet, weathered smile that came from somewhere deep in the chest. When Silverdust finished, he lifted his head and looked straight at him. Their eyes met. No fear, no command, just understanding. Cole felt something loosen inside him, the kind of release that doesn't make you lighter, but makes you whole again. He exhaled, setting the guitar aside, and said softly, "Told you, boy. Ain't no place safer than where both of us burned." Silverdust flicked an ear at the sound, and then stepped forward another pace, close enough that Cole could see the dust on his lashes. The lantern light trembled. Outside, the desert wind moved through the broken fence, whistling a tune only the land could know. The boards creaked and the night breathed, and the ghosts of broken spur finally went quiet. Cole leaned back, head tilted over his eyes. For the first time in years, he didn't dream of fire. He dreamed of hooves in the sand, of wind, in a silver mane of a horse running free under a sky that finally looked alive again. and in that fragile golden space between exhaustion and peace, trust was born not from words or training or force, but from patience, from silence, and from the simple act of two lost souls choosing to stay. A week after Silverdust had started to regain his strength, the desert wind carried the low hum of a truck engine up the road to Broken Spur Ranch. The sound was out of place in that quiet land of rusted fences and sleeping dust. Cole lifted his head from the stable door hand, still resting on the brush he'd been using. The truck, a silver pickup clean enough to belong to someone who still lived in the world, beyond Red Mesa, rolled to a stop near the fence. The door opened, and a young woman stepped out. She was maybe late 20s, tall, steady in her movements. Her boots were new, but already dusted from the drive, and she carried a veterinarian's kit slung over one shoulder clipboard tucked under her arm. The sun caught in her hair and flashed like copper for a second before she pulled her hat down against the light. Cole didn't move. "Afternoon," she called, voice clear, confident. "You must be Mr. Maddox." He nodded once. "Most days. I'm Lydia Harrow, Red Mesa veterinary. Heard there's a horse out here that needs more than luck to stay alive." Cole gave a small shrug, brushing another line of dust from Silverdust's flank. "He's doing just fine." Lydia walked closer, stopping a few feet away when she saw the stall's open door. Her eyes widened slightly. "He lets you touch him." Cole smiled faintly, not looking up. "He lets me ask, not take." That seemed to surprise her more than anything. She studied the scene in front of her, the old barn half lit by the warm amber glow of an oil lamp, smoke drifting in thin ribbons from a stove in the corner. Dust motes hung suspended in the air. In the middle of it, all the grizzled cowboy stood beside the silver-coated Mustang, moving slow, gentle, deliberate. Lydia exhaled, lowering her clipboard. "Well," she said quietly, "looks like you're doing something right." Cole's mouth twitched. "Depends who you ask." She spent the next hour observing from a careful distance. The Mustang was tall, taller than most, with long, clean limbs and a proud arch to his neck. There was power in him, even now bruised and limping. Lydia crouched and took in the details, the texture of his coat, the silver sheen across his shoulders, the faint dappling that caught the light like frost. She ran her gaze along his body until she found it, the faint circle scar around his neck. "Looks healed," she murmured almost to herself, "but deep. Rope burn." Cole stopped brushing. "Yeah. Someone tried to break him." Lydia stood pulling a small stethoscope from her kit. "Mind if I take a look?" Cole hesitated, then nodded. "He'll tell you if he minds." She moved slowly, speaking softly, every motion practiced and calm. Silverdust flinched, at first, ears flicking back but didn't retreat. She measured his breathing, checked his pulse, then gently clipped a few strands of hair from his mane and placed them in a small envelope. "This pattern," she said, examining the coat again. "It's not common. His DNA might tell a story we forgot." Cole leaned back against the stall post, eyes narrowed. "Story worth remembering or worth burying again?" Lydia smiled faintly. "Depends on who's telling it." She wrote something down on her clipboard, labeled the envelope "Unknown Mustang, Broken Spur Ranch," and tucked it into her bag. Her hands were quick but precise, the kind of hands that built trust without words. Cole watched her quietly. "You from around here, grew up in Albuquerque? Moved out this way after vet school. Figured the animals here need someone who won't give up easy." He nodded slowly. "Yeah. Desert'll test that." The afternoon stretched long and soft, filled with the smell of hay and oil. Lydia stayed after finishing her notes, helping Cole change the bandage on Silverdust's leg. She handed him gauze and antiseptic, instructing him how to clean the wound properly. "You've done a good job," she said. "It's healing clean. You got a steady hand." "Rodeo'll teach you that," Cole said, tightening the wrap. "You learn to keep your balance even when the ground don't." Lydia's eyes flicked to the old trophies gathering dust on a nearby shelf. "You used to ride professionally." He chuckled, a sound dry as gravel. "Used to do a lot of things." She didn't press. Instead, she studied the horse again, watching the way he breathed around Cole. "He's not scared of you. That's rare. Wild horses don't just forget what people do to them." Cole wiped his hands on a rag. "Maybe I'm the only human who ain't asking something from him." Lydia looked at him for a long moment. There was no defense in his tone, no pride, just a quiet truth. She turned her gaze to the burned rafters overhead, the ones that still smelled faintly of smoke. The entire barn was a scar, but someone had tried to make it livable again. The hay neatly stacked the boards patched the lantern lit. A man and a horse, both half broken, trying to make peace with ghosts. When she finally packed her tools, the sky outside had turned the color of fire, cooling into embers. She hesitated at the door. "You know," she said, glancing back, "I've seen horses heal faster than people." Cole looked up at her. "Maybe because they don't lie to themselves." Lydia smiled softly, then left him to the glow of the lantern and the quiet breathing of the Mustang. She came back the next morning, and the one after that. At first, she said it was to check the wound, but soon she was staying longer each day, making notes in her journal, cleaning the stable, bringing coffee and a bag of bread from the bakery in town. Cole pretended not to notice. He'd pour her a cup anyway. Silver Dust started to change too. He moved easier, started eating more. Some mornings he would even step closer when Lydia entered, sniffing at her sleeve before retreating again. The fear was still there, but softer now, replaced by curiosity. On the 5th day, she reached up to stroke his muzzle. The horse hesitated, then lowered his head and pressed gently against her hand. "Well," she whispered, smiling. "That's progress." Cole saw it from the corner of his eye while fixing a latch on the fence. "Told you," he said. "He's got good judgment." Lydia laughed, the sound light and unexpected in that quiet place. "So do you," she said. And for a second, Cole couldn't tell if she meant it as a compliment or a challenge. They talked more after that. About the land, the storms, the kind of loneliness that wasn't just absence, but memory, something that stayed in the soil. Cole found himself telling her things he hadn't spoken aloud in years, about Whisper, about the night of the fire, about how he'd almost sold the ranch after. "I figured maybe I was the curse," he said once, staring out toward the red hills. "Everything I cared about burned or left." Lydia didn't interrupt. She just listened, hands resting around her coffee mug, eyes steady. When he finally looked at her, she said quietly, "You ever think the land remembers?" He frowned a little. "Remembers what? All of it," she said. "What we take, what we give back, what we survive." He thought for a long time before answering. "Maybe. Or maybe it just forgives when we finally do." Lydia's smile this time wasn't sad, it was knowing. That sounds like someone who's starting to forgive himself. Cole didn't reply, but she noticed how he stood a little taller after that. As the days slipped by, Red Mesa softened around them. The desert was still harsh, but the mornings came cooler now, and the evenings longer. Lydia's silver pickup became a familiar sight on the road. The town started to whisper about it, the vet spending time out at the old Cowboy's place. But neither of them cared much for what people thought. One afternoon, as she packed her kit after another checkup, she turned to Cole and said, "You know, he's getting stronger every day. Won't be long before he's walking like nothing ever happened." Cole looked at Silver Dust standing under the doorway, the sunlight spilling down his back. "Guess that makes two of us," he said. Lydia tilted her head, studying him. You talk like a man who's starting to believe in second chances. Only 'cause one came walking out of a canyon to prove me wrong. They shared a quiet laugh, the kind that didn't need to last long to feel full. When Lydia finally climbed into her truck to leave, Silver Dust lifted his head and let out a low nicker. Cole chuckled and patted his neck. Don't worry, boy. She'll be back. Smart folks always are. The engine faded down the road, leaving behind only dust and the faint scent of coffee. Cole stood there a while, looking out at the endless red horizon. The wind was soft that evening, and for once, it didn't sound empty. The peace at Broken Spur didn't last long. It never did in Red Mesa, not when the desert carried gossip faster than wind and greed faster than fire. Within a week, the story of the Silver Mustangs had spread through every saloon, feed store, and diner in town. At the Rusted Spur Bar, Old Ranch, hands swapped half-truths and whiskey breath over chipped glasses. Old Maddox found himself a ghost horse, one of them said, slamming down a shot. Ain't no ghost, another replied. Heard it's a pure Mustang worth a fortune. By the time the local paper printed its front-page story, Silver Dust, the legend returns, the town was already split between believers and doubters. Some called it a miracle. Others called it madness. But for one man, it sounded like opportunity. Rhett Calloway read the headline over breakfast at his estate, 5 miles east of town. The name Cole Maddox made his lip curl in amusement. The two men had crossed paths decades ago, back when Cole was a rodeo star, and Rhett was still learning how to cheat his way through business. Silver Mustang, Rhett muttered, setting down his coffee. Well, well, seems the desert's still got a few secrets worth digging up. He stood, grabbed his hat, and by noon his black pickup was kicking up dust along the road to Broken Spur. Cole was brushing Silver Dust's mane when he heard the sound of tires on gravel. The rhythm of it didn't belong. It was too smooth, too clean. He set the brush down and wiped his hands on his jeans as the truck rolled to a stop near the barn. The door opened, and Rhett Calloway stepped out. Boots polished, hat pristine, the smell of cologne cutting through the scent of hay and dust. His belt buckle caught the light like a blade. Hell, Maddox, he drawled, leaning on the fence post as if it were his. Cole didn't answer. He went back to brushing the horse, the steady rhythm of the bristles, the only sound between them. Rhett stepped closer, his eyes catching the glint of Silver Dust's coat under the lamplight. He let out a low whistle. Well, I'll be damned. Thought folks were exaggerating. That's one hell of a horse you got there. Cole said nothing. Rhett smirked. He's worth more than this whole damn place, Maddox. You know that, let me take him. I'll make him a champion. Put him where he belongs. Cole straightened, finally meeting his gaze. His voice was low, calm, but carried a weight that made Rhett pause. He already is one. Just not for sale. For a moment, neither man spoke. The wind pushed through the open door, carrying the smell of dust and cedar oil. Silver Dust flicked his tail, sensing the tension muscles tightening under his coat. Rhett tilted his head, grin turning sharp. You really think you can keep something like that hidden forever? World's gonna come looking, Maddox. You can't keep what's meant to be seen. Cole's eyes stayed steady. Then the world better learn to knock. The two men stood facing each other, one all polish and profit, the other weathered and unyielding. No guns, no fists. Just silence thick enough to cut with a knife. And in that silence, something shifted. Rhett saw it in Cole's stance, in the quiet surety of a man who had nothing left to lose but his word. Rhett's grin faltered, replaced by something colder. He stepped back, adjusting his gloves. Careful, Maddox. Legends don't stay free long. Then he turned dust swirling around his boots as he walked toward the truck. Lydia had been standing in the doorway of the barn, a hand resting lightly on the frame. She waited until the sound of Rhett's engine faded before she spoke. "You just painted a target on both of you," she said softly. Cole picked up the brush again, his motion steady. "You can't cage what ain't yours to begin with." She walked closer, folding her arms. "You don't understand. Calloway doesn't let things go. He's been buying up horses' bloodlines. He'll twist the law if he has to." "I've seen men like him my whole life," Cole said. "They chase what they don't understand because they think owning it makes them less empty." Lydia studied him. "And what about you? You gonna stand in front of him when he comes back?" He looked up, eyes tired but unwavering. "If he wants the horse, he'll have to look me in the eye again. Doubt he's got the stomach for it." Her expression softened, but worry still lingered. "You're too calm about this." Cole gave a faint shrug. "Storms come, always have." The next few days turned uneasy. Lydia started noticing things, small, quiet things that didn't belong. A truck parked just off the highway at dusk. Boot prints near the fence line that weren't Cole's. Once she caught the reflection of binoculars glinting from the ridge. "Rhett's people," she said one morning, tightening her jacket as they stood near the paddock. "They're watching." Cole spat into the dirt eyes, scanning the horizon. "Let 'em watch. They'll get bored before I do." "Cole, this isn't just about pride," Lydia pressed. "If that horse really is what I think he is, there'll be papers DNA claims state involvement. Calloway could make this legal before you even know it." He smiled, faint but sharp. "Then maybe the law needs reminding what freedom looks like." Lydia frowned, stepping closer. "At least let me take Silverdust somewhere safe, maybe my clinic. Just till this dies down." Cole shook his head. "He stayed caged once. Not again. If he runs, it'll be because he chose to." She sighed frustration, mingling with admiration. "You're the most stubborn man I've ever met." "Only when it matters," he said. That night, the air carried the scent of coming rain, though the sky was clear. Silverdust paced inside the corral, restless. Cole leaned against the rail, smoking in silence. He could feel it, the quiet before something breaks. From the house, Lydia's shadow crossed the porch light. "You can't stay out here all night," she called. Cole didn't turn. "Ain't sleeping much anyway." She walked down to him, boots crunching softly in the dirt. For a moment they stood together, the horse's slow breathing filling the space between words. Lydia looked at him and said, "You know what you're doing is gonna make enemies." Cole nodded. "Guess I ain't the only one who's done that." "Maybe not," she said, "but you don't have to fight alone." He smiled, faint but real. "Ain't about fighting. It's about not running." Silverdust turned his head, eyes catching the faint light of the lanterns. His muscles rippled under his coat like liquid metal. Cole reached out and rested a hand on the rail. "He's the only thing left out here that still remembers what freedom feels like," he said quietly. "If that's a threat to men like Rhett, then maybe it ought to be." Lydia didn't argue. She just nodded, watching the man and the Mustang standing side by side in the fading light, two stubborn spirits holding the line against a world that measured everything in ownership. By dusk, the horizon turned the color of bruised copper. Dust rose in lazy curls across Red Mesa, circling above the land like smoke from a fire that hadn't started yet. Cole stood on the porch hat, pulled low, watching the sky change. The air grew heavy the way it does before something big breaks loose. Even the crickets went quiet. Inside the barn, Silver dust stamped and blew through his nostrils, pacing the stall, like he could feel the storm crawling closer. The horse's coat shimmered faintly in the dim light, already dusted with red grit that clung to everything in the desert. From the road came the faint rumble of Lydia's truck engine. She had insisted on heading back to town before nightfall. "You sure you'll be fine?" she'd asked. Cole had nodded, though his eyes had stayed on the horizon. "Storm will pass. Always does." Now, as he watched her taillights vanish into the haze, he felt the lie settle in his chest. This wasn't a storm that would just pass. By nightfall, the world had turned to copper and blood. Wind tore at the fences, rattled loose tin against the barn walls. Cole went out once more, locking the gates, checking the shutters. He lit the oil lamp near Silver Dust's stall, its flames swaying wildly in the draft. The barn groaned under the pressure beams, creaking like old bones. "Easy," he told the horse, his voice nearly drowned by the rising roar outside. "Ain't nothing we can't ride out." But even as he said it, the first wall of dust rolled across the mesa, tall as a building, thick as smoke. It came crawling over the ridge, swallowing moonlight, swallowing sound. The stars vanished. The storm had arrived. The first sign that something else was wrong came through the howl of the wind and the faint glare of headlights cutting through the storm. They flickered across the ridge, bouncing off the rock like lightning. Cole's stomach turned to stone. He snatched the rifle from its rack by the door, checked the chamber out of habit, and stepped into the yard. The air hit him like a fist, hot, gritty, alive. Sand clawed at his face, stinging his eyes. The lantern on the porch swung madly on its hook. Through the orange haze, he saw a dark truck, parked half-hidden near the fence. Shapes moved beside it, 3 of them hunched and wrapped in scarves against the sand. Rhett Calloway was leading his leather coat, snapping in the wind like a banner. Cole muttered under his breath, "You picked the wrong damn night." Rhett shouted something to the men behind him, but the wind swallowed the words. They moved low and fast toward the barn, their flashlights cutting brief white scars across the dark. Inside, Silver Dust was already in a frenzy. The horse reared and slammed his hooves against the stall door nostrils, flaring eyes rolling white. The old timbers shook under the force. Cole ran for him just as the first figure reached the side of the barn. "Get back!" he barked, his voice raw. The sound barely carried. A flash of light, one of Rhett's men trying to throw a lasso through the doorway. The rope caught air and came back tangled. Another tried again, shouting something. Cole raised the Winchester, fired once over their heads. The crack split the wind for a heartbeat. The men ducked. Rhett's voice rose through the storm, sharp and furious. "Don't hurt him. Catch the damn thing." Cole fired again, closer this time. "He ain't yours." Lightning tore the sky apart in a white flash that turned everything to stark, ghostly silhouettes. For one instant, Cole saw it all. Rhett shouting orders, the hunters pulling back against the wind, and Silver Dust rearing in his stall like a living flame, his coat turning pure white in the light. Then thunder crashed so loud it shook the ground. The storm hit full force. Wind screamed across the mesa, ripping at the barn roof, peeling off planks like paper. Sand filled the air until it was impossible to breathe. Cole staggered toward Silver Dust, covering his mouth with his sleeve. He could barely see. The lamp had blown out. Only lightning lit the chaos in blinding bursts. Rhett's men tried again, throwing another rope. It hit the stall door and missed. The next gust of wind tore the door from its hinges, slamming it into the wall. Silver Dust lunged free with a sound that cut through the storm, a wild primal cry that didn't belong to anything tame. Silver Cole shouted, coughing on the dust, "Stay." But the horse was beyond reason. Fear and fury drove him. He kicked, breaking the last of the boards some, and bolted into the storm. Cole stumbled after him, rifle still slung in his hand. Rhett yelled from somewhere behind him, "Don't let him get away." The words were ripped apart by the wind. A sheet of tin tore loose from the roof and went flying past the sound like a scream. Cole ducked, but another gust caught him from behind and threw him hard against the wall. Pain exploded through his shoulder. He dropped the gun, disoriented, half-blind. When his vision cleared, he saw silver dust out in the yard, head-high mane thrashing in the wind, lightning turning him into a creature of light and shadow. He was running straight toward the open desert. Then through the storm, something shifted. The horse slowed, turned his head back. Cole was on his knees now, one arm limp, sand cutting at his face. "Go!" he shouted, voice barely more than a whisper against the roar. "Run, damn you!" But Silver Dust didn't run. Instead, he wheeled around and came back through the storm. Rhett's men hesitated. One of them shouted, "It's coming back!" Through the storm, the Mustang barreled toward them, hooves pounding the earth in dull, heavy thuds. The hunters dropped their ropes and dove aside as Silver Dust tore past, straight for Cole. He stopped only when he reached him, planting his body between the man and the wind. Cole stared up, eyes wide, disbelief cutting through the haze. The horse's sides heaved, nostrils wide, breath hot against his skin. The storm slammed against them both, sand whipping like knives. A burst of lightning ripped the sky open again, and in that flash, Cole saw it. Silver Dust standing solid against the storm, his mane whipping like fire, his coat glowing with a light that seemed to come from within. The horse lowered his head, pressing his shoulder against Cole's back, shielding him from the flying debris. Cole coughed the air too thick to breathe. He tried to push the horse away, but Silver Dust held his ground. Every muscle in his body trembled from the effort of standing against the storm. "Goddamn fool," Cole muttered, half a laugh, half a sob. "Guess we both ain't done fighting yet." The horse snorted as if answering him and leaned harder into the wind. Behind them, Rhett cursed and waved his men toward the truck. "Forget it," he yelled. "We'll come back when it's over." They vanished into the red blur, swallowed whole by the sand. The morning after the storm was too beautiful to be trusted. The sky over Red Mesa stretched clear and endless, washed clean by wind and sand, until it shone like blue glass. The air carried that strange, hollow stillness that comes after chaos, as if the land itself were pretending nothing had happened. But in town, the storm hadn't passed. It had only changed shape. By mid-morning, Rhett Calloway was standing inside the sheriff's office, hat in hand, wearing the expression of a man who'd come to do a civic duty. His coat was still speckled with dust, though not from any honest work. "I'm filing an official report," he said, placing a folded paper on the desk. "A man named Cole Maddox is in illegal possession of a wild Mustang. Dangerous animal, unregistered, should have been turned over to the Bureau weeks ago." The deputy behind the counter raised an eyebrow. That the horse folks been talking about, Rhett's mouth curved. The one and only, pure silver coat, could be worth a fortune to the right people. "But that's not why I'm here, of course." "Of course not," the deputy muttered. Rhett continued smoothly. "The animal's best interest comes first. Man like Maddox, old, living out there alone, he's not fit to handle something like that. The horse belongs in a proper facility somewhere it can be managed." Word spread faster than paper could print. By noon, Red Mesa's cafe talk had turned from the storm to the scandal. Some said Rhett was right. Law was law after all. Others shook their heads, muttering that the old cowboy had already been through enough. By afternoon, the sheriff handed the case to his most level-headed man, Deputy Hank Torres. Hank had ridden these lands long before Rhett learned to sit a saddle. and he'd known Cole Maddox back when both had steadier hands and fewer ghosts. If anyone could walk the line between law and mercy, it was him. He saddled his horse and headed for Broken Spur Ranch, the sun at his back, and the dust of old friendship rising in his wake. Cole was out by the fence when Hank arrived. The ranch looked like a battlefield, half the barn roof gone sand drifts piled against the corral, and the old windmill bent at an angle like a broken limb. The man himself was bandaged at the shoulder, moving slower than usual, but still on his feet. Silver Dust stood nearby, grazing calmly amid the wreckage. Even bruised and dust-streaked, the horse looked unreal in the morning light, like a piece of the storm that refused to fade. Hank pulled his reins and dismounted, tipping his hat. "Heard you had quite a night, Cole." Cole glanced up, his face lined but calm. Wasn't a quiet one. Hank smiled faintly. "You never did like quiet." Before Cole could reply, another truck came grinding up the hill tires, spitting gravel. Rhett Calloway climbed out, flanked by two men with clipboards and the smug look of authority. "Well, ain't this a picture?" Rhett said, voice slick as oil. The law riding up just in time. Cole's hand stilled on the fence post. "You brought company?" "Witnesses," Rhett said easily. "Don't want anyone saying I didn't play fair." He held out a folded document, the edges creased but official looking. "I'm here to claim that horse. He's wild stock, belongs to the Bureau or to the highest bidder. You know how it works." Hank took the papers, but didn't open them right away. He looked past Rhett to where Silver Dust stood between the corral posts. The horse had lifted his head, ears forward, eyes steady. Then, in a slow, deliberate motion, he stepped forward until he stood half astride in front of Cole, tall, silent, unflinching. Rhett smirked. "Well, look at that. He's got spirit, I'll give him that." Hank studied the pair for a long moment, his thumb running along the folded papers. "He don't look wild to me." Rhett's voice turned sharp. "Because he's been broken." Cole shook his head. "No, because he chose peace." For a heartbeat, no one spoke. The wind moved softly through the fences, carrying the faint smell of rain that hadn't come. Hank looked from one man to the other, the polished businessman with his perfect boots and the weathered cowboy standing in the wreck of his own making, and knew which side of history he was staring at. They gathered by the fence line, the morning light hard and clean on their faces. Hank unfolded the papers, scanning the printed text, though he didn't really need to read it. He'd seen this kind of claim before, half law, half greed. "By the book," he said slowly, "any unregistered Mustang found on private land belongs to the Bureau. That's the rule." Rhett nodded, satisfied. Hank's eyes lingered on Silver Dust. "But this one seems to know where home is." Rhett's smile vanished. "The law's the law, Hank. Don't get sentimental. That horse is government property." Cole stepped forward, his shadow falling across the dirt between them. His voice was quiet but carried a weight that made Rhett flinch. "If the law's gonna punish kindness, then it ain't the law I was raised to respect." The wind paused, as if the desert itself were listening. Hank looked down at the papers again, then folded them neatly and slid them into his coat pocket. "You boys are putting me in a hell of a place." Rhett's tone sharpened. "You've got your orders. Do your job." Hank sighed, removing his hat and wiping his brow. "My job," he said softly, "ain't just following rules. It's knowing when they stop making sense." Cole's gaze softened a little, but he said nothing. The silence that followed was long and heavy, broken only by the creak of the half-fallen barn. Somewhere behind them, Silver Dust shifted his weight tail, flicking lazily, as if he too was waiting for the human world to make up its mind. Finally, Hank exhaled, his decision forming before the words did. "Cole, I'll give you 48 hours. If you can prove that horse ain't claimed by anyone, paperwork, DNA, whatever you got, I'll close the file. Rhett spun on him, outrage flashing in his eyes. That's not procedure. Hank met his glare evenly. Ain't the first time I bent one for the right reason. Rhett's jaw worked, but no words came. He turned toward Cole, sneering. 2 days, Maddox. Then he's mine. And when that happens, you better stay the hell out of my way. He motioned to his men and stalked back to the truck. The engine roared to life, spitting up a cloud of dust as they tore down the road. The sound lingered long after they were gone. Hank replaced his hat, looking almost apologetic. You know I can't hold him off forever. Cole nodded. Didn't ask you to. You got any proof? Not yet, Cole said. But Lydia's been working on something. Maybe she'll find what we need. Hank gave a small nod. Then I'll buy you 48 hours. After that, he trailed off, eyes settling on silver dust. Well, let's hope that horse really is as special as folks say. He mounted up and rode off slow dust, curling behind him like smoke. Lydia's truck arrived not long after. She parked beside the ruined fence, stepping out with a face that said she already knew something was wrong. Rhett, she asked. Cole nodded. Paperwork filed and signed. She exhaled sharply. 48 hours, she murmured half to herself. That's barely time to breathe. Cole leaned against the fence, staring out toward the horizon where the storm clouds had been yesterday. Sometimes, he said quietly, that's all you need. Lydia looked at him for a long moment. His shirt was still torn at the shoulder, the bandage spotted with blood. But there was a steadiness in his posture, a man no longer waiting for fate to choose his battles. What'll you do? She asked. He smiled faintly. Same thing I've always done. Keep him safe till the world figures out he don't belong to it. Silver Dust, standing a few paces away, flicked his ears toward the sound of their voices. The morning sun caught the sheen of his coat again, scattering it into 1,000 glints of light. He stood calm and silent, as if he understood the weight of every word. Lydia followed Cole's gaze and whispered, He doesn't even look real sometimes. He's real enough, Cole said. Too real for folks who see only what they can sell. The wind stirred the sand at their feet, carrying the faint scent of rain once more. For a moment, the ranch felt almost peaceful again. The kind of peace that comes not from safety, but from choosing to stand still anyway. Cole turned toward the barn. We got work to do, he said. 48 hours to prove he's free. Lydia nodded. Then let's start now. Hope, fragile, improbable, but real, breathed again across Red Mesa. The second morning came bright and sharp, the kind of light that made every blade of grass look newly born. The air over Red Mesa was so clean it almost hurt to breathe. For once there was no wind, no sand, only stillness, as if the desert itself was holding its breath waiting. Inside the barn at Broken Spur Ranch, Lydia Harrow stood with a sealed envelope in her trembling hands. The label on it read, Santa Fe Veterinary Genetics Division. She had barely slept since sending the sample. Now, 48 hours later, the results had returned just as Deputy Hank Torres had promised. Cole stood beside her, arms, crossed, hat low over his eyes. His bandaged shoulder was stiff, but his gaze stayed steady on the envelope. Hank leaned against the stall door, watching quietly. Even Silver Dust seemed to sense the moment's weight. He stood motionless in the corral, outside the sunlight, sliding over his coat like water. Lydia took a slow breath and broke the seal. The paper crackled in the silence. She unfolded it once, twice. Then she froze. Across the top, printed in clean black letters, were the words, Genetic match 98.9%. Cheros Blanco Mustang lineage extinct, 1956. For a long moment, no one spoke. Lydia blinked hard, reading the line again to make sure her eyes weren't lying. Then, in a voice that was barely more than a whisper, she said, "Cole, this horse is a living ghost of the West." Hank frowned. "You mean he's the last of a dead bloodline?" Lydia shook her head slowly, all replacing disbelief. "No, he is the bloodline. The Cheros Blanco Mustangs were thought gone for 70 years. Every trace wiped out by overbreeding and capture programs. And yet, he's standing right there." Outside, Silverdust raised his head, as if hearing his own name carried on the air. His mane caught the sun and flared into pale fire. Cole turned toward him silent. The man who'd once buried his past under dust and regret suddenly found himself looking at living proof that not everything lost stays gone. The West, his West, was still breathing. They tried to keep the discovery quiet, but nothing stays buried long in Red Mesa. Within a day, the rumor spread like wildfire. By noon the next morning, a local news van was parked outside the ranch gate. Then came the reporters, the photographers, the animal rights groups, the curious travelers who wanted to see the extinct horse. Headlines bloomed across social media: "Extinct Mustang found alive in New Mexico living fossil," or "Cowboy hoax TV crews set up on the dusty road outside the fence, their cameras aimed toward the barn." Cole hated the sound of their chatter. Their excitement felt wrong, too loud for what Silverdust represented. Rhett Calloway arrived not long after this time with a polished convoy of SUVs and a dozen people in matching jackets embroidered with his stable's logo. His smile gleamed like steel under the desert sun. For the good of history, he announced to the cameras, "This remarkable animal must be placed under professional care. I'm offering to fund a state-of-the-art preservation facility. This isn't about ownership, it's about legacy." His words dripped with sincerity, but his eyes gave him away cold, precise, already calculating how much glory could be wrung from one creature's survival. Cole stood by Silverdust's side, while the microphones and lenses turned toward him. His expression didn't change. One reporter called out, "Mr. Maddox, do you have any comment? Is it true you refuse to release the horse for preservation?" Cole looked past them all to the open desert shimmering beyond the fences. "He don't need a cage to prove he's real," he said quietly. The crowd murmured, cameras clicked. Behind him, Silverdust flicked his tail unbothered by the noise. In that moment, the Mustang seemed larger than any of them, more ancient, more honest. A ghost, yes, but a living one, defying a world that had forgotten how to listen. By the afternoon, the crowd had thinned to the ones who mattered. Rhett stayed along with his lawyers and a state official carrying a clipboard full of stamped documents. Hank was there too, hat low hand, resting on his holster, not out of threat, but to remind everyone that the law still had a pulse out here. Lydia stood near the fence, exhausted but defiant. Rhett's voice carried easily in the dry air. "We've come with legal authority," he said, waving the papers. "This horse qualifies as a biological asset of national interest. Under the Wildlife Preservation Act, we have every right to take custody for study and protection." Cole didn't move. He just looked at Hank. That true Hank's jaw worked. "By the book," he said slowly. "Yeah. But the book don't cover everything that's right." Rhett scoffed. "Don't start preaching Torres. The law's clear. That animal's government property now." Hank met his stare. Sometimes the right thing ain't legal yet. The tension in the air tightened. Rhett took a step closer, voice hardening. "You're choosing a washed-up cowboy over progress." Hank shook his head. "I'm choosing decency over greed." Lydia stepped forward, her voice calm but edged with fire. "You can't own a miracle, Rhett. You can only protect it." He turned on her, smiling in that polite, cruel way of his. "And who decides what's protection, Doctor? You, him?" He pointed toward Cole. "You think sentiment is science?" Cole had stayed quiet through it all, watching the exchange with the patience of stone. Now he straightened and stepped forward, his shadow stretching long in the afternoon light. "You can write all the laws you want," he said, his voice low but steady. "But you can't make a free soul bow." The words hit the air like the crack of a whip. Silver Dust moved then one single step, placing himself beside Cole, shoulder to shoulder. His ears flattened, not in fear, but in warning, his gaze locked on Rhett's, unblinking, wild and ancient. The kind of look that made men remember they were guests in this land. For a moment, no one breathed. Rhett's mouth opened, but whatever argument he had died in his throat. Even the wind went still. The sun began to dip, turning the land gold. A hush fell over the gathered crowd. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried a long, low sound that carried across the mesa. Hank lowered his hand from his holster. "I think that's enough talk for today." Rhett's jaw clenched. "You'll regret this," he hissed. But his voice lacked conviction now. Something in the silence had changed him too. He looked around. The reporters who'd once circled like vultures had stopped filming. One by one, they lowered their cameras. Even his own lawyers avoided his eyes. Lydia took a step closer to Silver Dust. The horse's coat shimmered in the dying light, alive and unreal all at once. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from awe. "He's not a legend," she said softly. "He's proof the land remembers." Cole nodded, his gaze still on the horizon. And maybe he murmured it, forgives too. The words hung there quiet and final, as if they belonged to the desert itself. Hank pulled the folded document from Rhett's hand, looked at it once, and then slipped it into his own coat pocket. "I didn't see anything today worth taking," he said. Rhett stared at him, speechless. For the first time since anyone could remember, the man, who always had something to say, found none. He turned abruptly and walked toward his truck. The others followed their footsteps, muffled by dust. The engine started, then faded into the distance. The ranch fell silent again. A breeze swept across the open plain, lifting trails of golden dust into the air. Cole stood with one hand on Silver Dust's neck, Lydia and Hank nearby. The last light of day bathed the scene in a soft, almost sacred glow. Silver Dust raised his head. His ears twitched once, then he let out a long, powerful whinny that rolled across the mesa, echoing off the cliffs and ridges until it sounded like 100 horses answering from the beyond. The sound wasn't wild or frightened. It was a declaration. Freedom not gone, just waiting. The dawn broke clear and cold, a strange, still light spilling across Red Mesa. The storm had scrubbed the air clean, leaving behind a silence so perfect it felt wrong, like the world was holding its breath before something broke. Cole Maddox stood by the front fence, Winchester resting against his leg eyes, fixed on the road that wound in from the east. The sun was a hard white coin climbing over the ridges, casting long shadows across the ranch. Even the wind had gone still. Behind him, the ranch was awake in a quiet kind of way. Lydia Harrow moved through the barn, organizing what medical supplies she had left hands steady, but eyes distant. In the kitchen of the old ranch house, Hank Torres sat by the radio, twisting the dial for news that wasn't there. No one spoke of Rhett Calloway, but they were all thinking of him. Silver Dust grazed a few yards away, head low, tail swishing lazily. But every so often his ears flicked toward the horizon, his muscles tightening for just a second before settling again. He could feel it too. Cole ran a cloth along the barrel of the Winchester, the movement slow, deliberate. He wasn't polishing it for war, he was simply making peace with the fact that the day might demand something of him. If it's gotta end, he muttered, eyes on the distance, might as well end on my feet. The sound barely carried in the stillness. It wasn't bravado. It was a prayer said the cowboy way without looking up. By noon, the quiet shattered. Engines rumbled across the valley, echoing off the stone ridges. Dust plumes rose in the heat, long and dirty, marking the approach before the trucks even came into view. Lydia froze where she stood. Hank stepped out onto the porch, his jaw tight. Cole didn't move. The first truck crested the hill, black, polished, official. Behind it came another, then another. 5 men climbed out, rifles slung, jackets dark against the sun. Rhett Calloway led them, hat pulled low, expression carved from granite. He held a folded paper in one hand. "Step aside, Maddox," Rhett called, his voice cutting through the wind. "I'm taking him." Cole leaned his arm over the fence post, the rifle hanging loose at his side. "You can take the paper, Rhett, but you ain't taking him." Rhett smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Don't make this hard. The state signed off on the seizure. That horse belongs to the people now." Lydia came out from the barn, dust streaking her cheeks. She stood between them, palms raised slightly. "This doesn't have to end like this," she said. "You both love horses, you just forgot what that means." Rhett didn't even look at her. "Love don't feed men, Miss Harrow. Land, money, power, that's what lasts." Hank came down the steps behind Cole, moving slow, deliberate, like a man trying to walk between lightning bolts. "Maybe not Rhett," he said quietly, "but only one of those things will follow you when you're gone." For a long moment, no one moved. The sun burned high, the light harsh and merciless. A faint breeze stirred the dust, lifting it in lazy spirals around their boots. Cole's thumb brushed the safety on his rifle. Rhett's men shifted their weight, eyes darting toward the fence line. The air itself felt tight. Rhett nodded once. The signal. 2 of his men started forward, heading for the gate. Their boots crunched on the dry ground. Silver dust lifted his head. The muscles along his neck rippled, his tail flicking high. Then bang, his hooves struck the earth, a sound that rolled through the air like thunder. Birds burst from the trees in a flurry of wings. "Don't make me do this," Rhett Cole said, raising the Winchester but keeping the barrel steady and low. Rhett didn't stop. "Then don't stand in the way." One of the hired men reached the latch and started to lift it. The other drew a pistol from his belt, hands shaking just enough for everyone to see. "Stop!" Lydia shouted. The cry broke the tension like glass. Rhett spun toward her. The armed man turned halfway, and in that instant, the wind came alive again, howling out of nowhere, throwing dust into the air in a sudden blinding wall. The men staggered back, covering their faces. Cole ducked, eyes watering, heart pounding. He could barely see through the storm of grit. Then came the sound, deep, furious, unstoppable, the pounding rhythm of hooves. Silver dust burst through the haze mane, flying eyes burning with light. He charged straight toward the fence, straight toward the men, and in one breathtaking motion, he planted himself between Cole and Rhett's chest, heaving nostrils, flaring a living wall of muscle and will. Rhett froze. His finger twitched on the trigger instinct, fear, pride, and the shot cracked through the air. The world stopped. Dust hung in suspension. No one moved. Cole blinked, searching for blood, for movement. Then he saw it, the bullet buried harmlessly in the dirt, inches from Silver Dust's hoof. Rhett's hand was shaking. The gun slipped from his fingers and hit the ground with a dull thud. The Mustang didn't flinch. He stood steady, head high, looking straight at Rhett with a gaze that seemed to see right through him. For a long moment, man and beast faced each other. The desert wind quieted again. Even the trucks seemed to hold their engines still. Rhett's voice broke first. "He trusts you more than we ever trusted ourselves." No one replied. He took a step back, shoulders sagging as if something inside him had given way. His eyes went from Cole to Silver Dust and back again. "I wanted to own a legend," he said, his tone softer now. "Turns out, legends don't belong to anyone?" Cole lowered the rifle slowly. The old weapon hung limp in his hands, forgotten. He stepped forward, resting a hand on Silver Dust's neck. The horse's skin was warm under his palm, the muscles still trembling from adrenaline. Their eyes met for a moment, man and animal, both survivors of things they'd never spoken of. And in that silence, forgiveness passed between them without a word. The dust began to settle. The sunlight came back. "Walk away, boys," Rhett said finally, his voice rough. "This place ain't ours." His men hesitated, looking to him for orders that wouldn't come. One by one, they lowered their weapons. The black truck doors opened, hinges squeaking. Rhett turned to leave, then paused at the top of the hill. "You ever figure out what he's here for?" Maddox Cole looked down at Silver Dust, whose ears twitched toward the voice, but whose body stayed calm, rooted. "Maybe to remind us we still got something worth protecting." Rhett nodded slowly, the faintest trace of a smile ghosting across his face. Then he climbed into the truck and drove away. The others followed. The dust from their tires drifted high into the sky, dissolving into the light like smoke. The evening laid a copper coin across Red Mesa, that old light that makes dust look holy. Heat bled out of the day by degrees, and a lighter wind began to move the grasses in long, hushed strokes. Cole leaned against the fence rail as if it were the back of an old friend, the boards warm under his palm, the creak of wood, a soft breath. The last of the sun found every scar on his knuckles and every line at the corners of his eyes and turned them into bright thread. Out in the open, Silver Dust stood with his head lifted and his coat catching fire in the low blaze of the west, each hair-tipped strand of his mane flashing like a drawn filament. The horse's breath came slow, and even a steady tide rolling out of a chest that had learned patience. Lydia stood on one side of Cole, Hank on the other. None of them spoke. There was nothing left to argue with, not in a light like this. The wind braided itself with the warm sounds of the evening, the tick of cooling tin, the stifled cluck of a roosting hen, and the soft hiss of a horse's lungs filling and emptying in a rhythm older than fences. Every now and then, Silver Dust flicked an ear toward them and then back to the horizon, careful present, unafraid. He lifted his head higher. The long, unhurried whinny started low, a note pulled from somewhere behind the ribs and sent up into air that glowed. It climbed and lengthened, rich and clean, tearing the quiet in a way that healed it as it passed. The sound went everywhere. The fence and the rocks and the old gatepost soaked it up, and it ran the length of the dry creek, bounced off Red Mesa's shoulders, poured itself down the far gullies, and came home again softer. Cole felt the call roll through him the way thunder rolls through an empty house. He smiled without looking away. "He ain't calling for help anymore," he said. "He's calling them home." They all shifted their gaze to the far rim of the land. At first, there was only heat shimmer. Then the mirage thickened into moving shapes, and the shapes resolved into bodies, shoulders, hips, tails like banners. A band of horses stepped into the light as if the sun itself had brought them. Black and bay and dun and a pale roan that looked dusted with cloud. They came on at a walking pace, ears forward, each hoof fall setting loose a sparkle of powder that turned to a brief constellation before it settled. Lydia's hand went to her mouth. She didn't try to stop the tears. They came anyway, bright in the last light. Hank took off his hat and held it at his side. Maybe the land remembers who it belongs to, he said, not above a whisper. Silver Dust moved toward the gate without waiting to be asked. Cole unlatched it with a small automatic motion, and the hinges made the old sound of iron talking itself awake. The Mustang stepped through and then stopped as if in acknowledgement before he angled out into the open to meet the approaching band. The other horses paused first, like rain checking the ground it means to fall on. They swung their heads, nostrils tasting the air. Silver Dust stood on level earth between them, and the fence, calm, anchored his neck, arched in a way that said leader without asking for it. One of the bays came forward, stretched its nose to the scar at Silver Dust's neck, and breathed there as if reading a scripture written in old skin. The roan followed. Then, the dun. One by one they smelled him, and dipped their heads, small brief nods that meant, "We see you." The band turned as one and drifted toward the deeper west. Silver Dust moved with them. Not in front at first, but right where a current holds and directs the whole river. Then, almost lazily, he took the point at the space where horizon meets decision and led. Each step broke a pearl string of dust that lifted and hung and then caught the last light and burned like crushed mica. Cole leaned a little heavier on the fence. "Run free, old boy," he said, too quiet for anyone but the horse and the land to hear. "You earned it." The band went on until it became part of the light that carried it. When they were small, it was easy to believe they were prints of horses running across the inside of the sun. A year is a long thing when you measure it in feedings and mending and waking early to lift a latch in the dark. And then it's nothing at all when you measure it by what returns. 12 months after the day the band came, the ranch wore a new sign. It was a thick plank of cedar planed smooth, but left with the story of its annual rings, the letters cut by hand and darkened with oil. Red Mesa Sanctuary. Underneath, smaller, for the wild. For the West. The old name Broken Spur had not been thrown away. It lived in a framed photograph that hung by the door, the tin-lettered board in the shot tilted and smoke-stained, a memory kept so it wouldn't be a wound. But the new sign told the truth of the place, as it was now not a home for a man alone, not a museum of what had burned, but a school and a shelter, and a promise made out loud. Cole and Lydia ran the sanctuary like a long, steady song you can hum while your hands are busy. She drew up a curriculum that would have made any school principal proud, except it smelled like hay instead of whiteboard cleaner, and half the lessons were taught with sleeves rolled and fingers in a halter knot. On Saturdays, a yellow bus sighed to a halt at the end of the drive and turned its doors to spit out a parade of town kids in baseball caps and dusty sneakers. Eyes wide the way city kids look at tall buildings. They gathered by the corral and listened while Lydia told them how a horse's eye works, how a hoof grows, what it means when ears point like compass needles, why a flicking tail might be a patience running out or simply a fly. She spoke plain and bright, and their heads tracked her like sunflowers. Cole showed them the hard parts that are the soft parts too. How to rake a stall so you don't pull your back, how to coil and throw a rope and do it again until your hands know more than your head, how to hold still so that an anxious gelding learns to step into stillness and not be punished for his worry. He bent to their height when he explained a cinch, and he made them laugh when he told them that a horse can smell a lie the way a dog can smell bacon. He taught them to clip a lead under the chin instead of at the throat, to move a hip with a touch instead of a shove, to step back and let a fearful animal come forward on its own time. Every lesson ended with the same rule: respect gets fed. By noon, the kids were tired in the best way, streaks of dust like war paint across their faces, hay in their hair, pride like a small warm coal under the sternum. They would sit in the shade of the big cottonwood by the water trough and eat sandwiches while Hank clomped up the porch steps with a cardboard tray of coffees and a brown paper sack of cinnamon rolls that leaked icing onto his hands. Didn't think the old outlawed turned teacher he would say, offering the bag. Cole took one and pretended to inspect it like a forged document. World's full of surprises, he'd say. Even for folks like us. Sometimes Hank stayed to mend a hinge or fix the wire on a gate that had started to sag. Sometimes he just sat on the top rail and watched the ring, where the kids learned to ride tiny circles inside a big circle under a sky that had no edges. Inside the cabin above the desk, where Lydia planned and Cole wrote down feed deliveries and vet appointments, hung a photograph in a simple pine frame. It had been taken the evening silver dust left, with the band the horse's body lit along the spine, as if the sun had been poured there, the edges of his mane on fire where the light caught. Under the frame, carved into a narrow strip of mesquite with a pocket knife you had to sharpen too often, was a line. He taught us freedom ain't just about running. It's about trust. Kids read it and asked what it meant. Volunteers read it and didn't ask. The line made the rounds in town, whispered in the feed store, when someone wanted to sound like they knew a thing worth holding. The sanctuary grew like things do when they're well tended and needed. 2 more pens went up, then a round corral with boards so smooth you could run a palm over them and not catch a splinter. A small classroom took shape in an old tack shed. Shelves full of skulls and feathers, and hoof casts a map of migration routes, thumbtacked to the wall jars, with desert plants labeled in Lydia's neat hand. The sound of a guitar sometimes drifted from the porch, in the blue hour, the notes slow and clean. The instrument older than most of the kids, and tuned to a memory that didn't hurt anymore. Folks came from farther away than Red Mesa to see what had been made a place where the wild wasn't a spectacle, but a neighbor. They brought questions and donations, and sometimes a broken thing, a fence post, a heart, a habit. The place took all 3 and found uses for them. Every week had its work and its weather and its good news. Sometimes it had a kind of grief that wasn't a setback, but a reminder. On a clear afternoon in late spring, a small group from a retirement home came out in a blue van. They stood at the fence in cardigans and ball caps and watched 2 young mustangs circle each other in a stiff-legged dance that would become play. One of the visitors, a woman with hands like roots, pressed her palm to the rail and said to no one in particular, "I used to ride." The corral breathed out with her, and for a second she was 30 years younger. It happens like that in places that remember what to make room for. One warm Saturday, a little before sundown, the last of the kids had stayed behind to help scatter hay. Lydia sent a pair to refill the salt, another to check the waterers. Cole showed a wiry boy named Mateo how to pick a hoof and keep his toes out from under a careless step. When they finished, a girl with a braid thick as a rope stood in front of him and asked the question all the kids eventually asked often, word for word, as if it lived in a book they all had checked out. "Is he your horse?" Mr. Maddox Cole studied the girl's earnest face, then glanced past her shoulder to the photograph on the wall, and farther still to the open, where the grass made a soft river under the late light. He let the quiet run a little before he answered. "No son," he said, and his smile creased the dust on his cheeks. "He's everyone's reminder." The children looked at each other, puzzled the way kids do when a grown-up sounds like a riddle and not a person. Lydia laughed softly and stepped in. "He means that horse belongs to all of us, same as this land," she said. "Some things are too big for a person to own." Cole nodded. Freedom don't need owners. It just needs someone to respect it. They didn't get it all the way, not yet. But something in the way he said it, a tone polished by use, lodged and stayed. Later on the bus, one of them would write the sentence on a paper wristband and tie it on. And by the time the string frayed, it would have turned into habit. The kids helped put the tack away. They stacked helmets on a shelf and lined boots in a row that didn't stay straight, but tried. Parents honked in the gravel drive. There were the usual waves and last questions and promises to come early next time. Then the bus pulled away, leaving a ribbon of dust that lifted and unspooled and settled across the road like a thrown scarf. Lydia leaned against the doorframe and watched the light change. "They'll sleep hard tonight," she said. "Good work'll do that," Cole said, and meant both kinds. Hank's old pickup crunched up the drive with 2 coffees in its cup holders and a brown bag on the seat. He held it up through the open window as if he were serving an arrest warrant. "Peace offerings," he said. Cole took the bag. "You keep bribing us, we're gonna expect it." "You already expect it," Hank said, and tipped a wink at Lydia, who smiled the tired, happy smile of a person who has earned her weariness. They sat a while on the porch steps, the 3 of them drinking coffee that steamed in the cooler air, and watching the sun choose its last words. Somewhere in the back lot, a pair of Mustangs nibbled each other's withers like kids fidgeting, and the cottonwood shook its leaves like a basin of coins. Evenings come on quick in a country that throws its light hard. The sky loosened its color by degrees until the whole west was a long sheet of hammered brass. Cole walked down to the fence he'd leaned against 100 times since he was young and stupid and strong, and just as many since he'd learned the different kinds of strong. He rested a boot on the lower rail and let his forearms ride the top his hat, tilted enough to see everything. Between the fence and the rim of the world, the land went wide and shallow like breath. You could believe anything could come out of it. Storm salvation, a line of horses. The first silhouette came like it always had no fanfare, just a small certainty sliding loose from the rim. Then another, then 6 more. In a minute, the band drew themselves out of the horizon's lip and moved like a sentence that knows where it's going. At their head, as simple as water finds downhill, silver dust appeared. Time didn't stop. It widened. He wasn't a young horse anymore, not the way colts are, but there was still flame in the way he placed afoot a kind of proud economy that said he kept what he'd earned. He led them across the shallow swale that had seen 1,000 small pilgrimages of deer and cattle and men, and the band's dust rose in sheets that took the sun's last light and made it into something you could carry on the insides of your eyelids long after the dark had come. Lydia came to the fence and leaned beside Cole, their shoulders almost touching. Hank stood a few paces back, his hat in his hands again, the brim creasing with the pressure of his fingers. They didn't wave or call or clap. They watched. The whole field turned to an ocean of light. Grass heads caught the sun and threw it back like sparks, and for a span of heartbeats the desert wore a coat made of the same bright stuff that had once wrapped Silver Dust when he stepped away the first time. The Mustang slowed as he reached the line where he'd often stopped before. He lifted his head higher, tasting the air for things seen and unseen. A small breeze picked at his forelock. The rest of the band eased around him the way swallows ease around a windbreak. Cole touched the edge of his hat. The gesture was salute and benediction and goodbye that didn't mean leaving. His voice surprised him by how steady it came. "Run free, old boy. You earned it." Silver Dust turned his head, and if he saw them, he made no show of it. He did what he had done from the start. He chose the open. The band flowed after him, hips rolling tails like pen strokes in a story that kept writing itself. They slipped across the last of the sun like it was a river they alone knew the ford of. And then they were long, and then they were small, and then they were decoration on the rim of the world. And then they were memory, which is heavier and lighter than anything alive. A long, clean whinny lifted from the dim one voice, then 2, then the chord of many throats. It traveled out and up, and then seemed to come back thinner and sweeter, the way a prayer returns as breath. The sound offered itself to the wind, and the wind carried it, and all three sound wind, and the horses that made one and rode the other became hard to separate. The light lowered one more time, a slow nod, and set the mesa on fire. Shadows stretched like ropes uncoiling from fence posts. The cabin window threw a square of gold that reached exactly as far as it could and then surrendered to evening. A coyote set its small piece on a far ridge, not hunger exactly, not warning, just participation. Cole stayed until the last of it had been spent. When he finally pushed off the fence, the board spoke again, that soft old man's sigh that belongs to wood that has done its work. He settled his hat and let out a breath that had been living under his ribs all day. "Run free, old boy," he said again, quieter. "You earned it." He didn't expect an answer. He got one anyway, not from the rim, but from inside, the kind of loosening you feel when a locked door in a house you've been living in for years simply opens and reveals a room full of light you'd forgotten was there. He stood with it a while, and then he went up to the porch where two friends waited in the afterglow with coffee cooling and jokes they hadn't told yet. Behind them, the sign on the gate caught what little light was left and held it as if to say that some things can be learned and kept. Above them, night shouldered out the last of the color and hung itself with the usual stars. The land breathed. The sanctuary settled. Somewhere beyond the fence line, hooves found their way through the shallow places, and the old west, the real one, the one made of breath and trust and hard-kept choices, went on not dead, not even sleeping, just moving as it always had toward the next good piece of open.